Welcome, everybody, to another rendition of the 706 podcast, your favorite movie-themed podcast where we discuss, deliberate, examine the various films of the last century plus, and decide which 706 are the best, in our opinion, and belong in our collective canon. And when I say "are," I'm referring to myself as well as my three esteemed co-hosts. Why don't we go around and everybody can just say hi to the camera, and you know your fan contingent will know you're still alive, so they'll be happy with that. So Tony, Anthony, and Connor, why don't we just go around?
Hi everyone, this is Tony.
Anthony.
What's up to my Connor heads? This is Connor. I'm back for another episode. Let's win this one. Let's do it, guys.
Thank you so much, Connor. And you know, I'm glad we're having this episode now. It's a really good time for us to kind of get away from some of the talk about Kamala Harris's worthiness to be the next president, and Tony's fondness for his home state senator J.D. Vance and his proclivity for couches and other creases. But that's neither here nor there, Tony. I'm sure we can get into it. There's some overlap here somehow. But let's talk about this movie, Dog Day Afternoon. You might have heard of it. It's actually been recognized by the Library of Congress as a movie with some sort of, profile that deserves preservation. It's like a cultural artifact of the 20th century, which is pretty great. So naturally, I'm expecting 3 no's. That's going to be coming up pretty soon when we vote. I'm sure Anthony's going to say, it just didn't do it for him. Connor's going to talk about, why didn't they rob a different bank? And Tony's going to say, he wishes, all the shots were 8mm. So we're going to get into it now. Dog Day Afternoon, if you don't know, is a film directed by Sidney Lumet and released, let me see it, I believe in 1975. Yes, 1975. It's a drama. It's not really suspense. It's definitely not a thriller. It's not really suspense. I mean, the plot is in essence ostensibly suspenseful, right? Standoff after a bank robbery gone wrong in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn area. But the movie itself is more subtle in its delivery of adrenaline releasing moments, right? It's not as rote as you might expect from a bank heist movie. It's a little different, and I think that's why it stood the test of time, as well as the performances. So we're looking at, kind of the script and the people charged with bringing that script to life. Of course, the person most responsible for that and most kind of indelible and inextricably attached to this film is Al Pacino. Al Pacino plays the main character in this film. He's one of the bank robbers, also helped by John Cazale or Cazale. I never know. I think it's Cazale. Somebody who met an untimely death. He's Fredo from The Godfather. So they have a relationship. John also was in The Deer Hunter, dated Meryl Streep, died from cancer quite young. Sad story, but that's neither here nor there. This is a kind of a prestige film with a director who had already established himself with titles such as 12 Angry Men and a few other really, really good ones. Anthony, you're my resident historian. What else did Lumet do before this?
Didn't he do that movie like Foul Safe? Have you ever seen that one with Henry
Network?
Oh, Network, but Network was
yes.
So
Right.
actually,
Wasn't Serpico before this? I'm just
Serpico?
looking this up. I thought it was.
Serpico was 73, so we're looking at 2 years before the Pawnbroker. I've heard of that. He obviously went on to have a great career. He did Network. He did The Verdict. I think that was Paul Newman, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Paul Newman. Great courtroom drama. But, somebody who really was able to flex his muscles with this script, which was born out of a magazine article chronicling an actual bank heist that took place in 1972 in Brooklyn. And so we follow two robbers who, they're somewhat dim-witted, a little naive perhaps, and they get into a situation that's clearly above their capacity to reason with, and they the story itself chronicles their dealings with the police as they have some hostages, bank workers, and their attempts to abscond and leave the country on a jet that they have demanded to be delivered to JFK Airport that they'll escape on. So it's kind of a half-assed plot or a half-assed plan to begin with. And it's clear that these people haven't really thought it through. But where the movie really does shine through is in its portrayal of Sonny, played by Al Pacino, and his various relationships, the various people in his life. His mother, who seems quite enabling and also a little, what's the word I want to describe her as? Histrionic, perhaps. His actual wife, who is, seems to be a faithful mother of two, but at the same time incapable of meeting Sonny's needs. And then his self-proclaimed wife, who is a trans woman, or not even really, actually just a gay man who's interested in sex reassignment surgery that, purportedly is the reason for Sonny trying to rob the bank. So I've set the stage perhaps a little more than I usually do, but I want us to all kind of get back into that headspace of the movie. We all usually watch it right beforehand, but those things can fade quickly. So now that we're on the same page, we're oriented to what we're talking about. I do want to hear the initial reactions from my co-hosts. Can everybody remind me if they'd seen this movie or not? It's been a while since our last episode was filmed. I believe, Tony, you'd seen it? Okay, and then Connor and Anthony had not, correct? Or Connor, you might have.
I have seen it
before. So this is, okay. So Anthony, why don't we start with you, Anthony? You're the one who picked it. I nominated it and you chose it. You're also leaving Brooklyn, as Brooklyn is your home now, and you'll be moving to greener pastures quite soon. So, there's some synergy there in some way. I'm not sure how, but tell us what your impression was of this film.
Yeah, as a soon-to-be carpetbagger, I suppose. The movie came along at fortunate timing. Shay and I had just started watching, or had just watched through Clute, All the President's Men. I had recently seen not too long ago The Parallax View. All films from the 70s, which deal with paranoia in their own ways, or kind of rallying against the establishment, the traditional systems of power, to borrow a phrase from Adam Curtis. But I had not seen Dog Day Afternoon before, which I suppose was kind of a big missing gap. And I know, as you were saying, how did you say John Cazale, however we say his last name, what a filmography it is that he had in its sort of short life. But Dog Day Afternoon was just that one that I hadn't seen. And then so we come to it finally. And I was totally with the movie from start to finish. In some ways, of course, as ridiculous, as absurd as their plan is, you kind of, or at least I felt like myself, was rooting for them, was rooting for Pacino and Cazale's characters to somehow get out, to somehow make it through. And not just in a way for them to simply win, but in a way for them to kind of show how ridiculous this all sort of seems to be. I wanted their ridiculous point of view to be true of the world around them and not just the cynical kind of landscape, which is why my favorite parts of the film are when Al Pacino jumps out into the street and we have these kind of just onlookers, Brooklyn onlookers, which feel so true to the actual neighborhood and so true to an actual city life, just watching and cheering and egging them on as he shouts, oh shoot! Now I can't think of it. As he shouts the name of the prison,
Attica.
that Attica. As he shouts Attica, and the crowd gathers on. As he throws money to the crowd, as he kind of humiliates and makes fun of how many just obscene amounts of cops are there, unable to kind of do anything to stop this until kind of the end point of the movie, which really to me hit me like a brick. I knew it kind of feels almost like a Family Guy joke or something, but I knew I was waiting for just that simple end to just kind of be complete. And so when the bullet goes through his partner in the end, I felt it. And I just felt this kind of cruel despair kind of flowed in for me personally. So it's a thing is like, I suppose maybe as we talk about it more, there's something deeper to be said about the movie. But to say something that I think Tony usually says, this was a movie I felt on a mostly visceral level. And this was a movie I felt where the emotion had me with it. I was laughing at times. I felt like it was a dark comedy in moments. I felt like my heart was racing. I felt my breath tighten with everything going on. But I was just mostly just really pleased with the movie, which really stood out to me for just not for acting, directing. Now, I know many people would say this is probably Lumet's masterpiece. I know many more would say Before the Devil Knows You're Dead is his masterpiece. But I got to stick up for Dog Day Afternoon here. So good pick, Kirk.
Hey, I'm glad you liked it, Anthony. Couldn't agree more with a lot of what you said, and yeah, I think we should definitely hold space to talk a little bit more about Lumet's direction and just how he cultivates the atmosphere that we live in for this 2 hours, these 2 hours. So let's go ahead and go over to Connor. Connor, first off, what number was this? Was this your second time seeing it? Kind of what's your history with the film, and then what were your impressions upon this viewing?
This would be my second time seeing it, I believe, Kirk. I probably watched it probably a matter of 3-4 years ago, not super long ago as far as my current movie watching is concerned. Feels like a pretty recent watch for me. Sadly, Kirk, I think your strategy may have backfired with the mention of the Library of Congress, preferred for preservation because I hate the Library of Congress. Okay, I can't stand them. They have certain policies about what you're allowed to do and not do in their bathrooms that, let's just say, I've had some run-ins with them, and I do not respect this thing. So this is Kirk. You're gonna have to make a better argument than that for why this movie is worthy of our canon, not just preservation, a canon. Okay. I really enjoyed this movie to begin with. In my first watch, I liked it a lot. On this watch, I kind of expected that it would come through with kind of just my brilliance, mature postgraduate student brain would just kind of connect all of the dots and make a very clear reading for myself that would kind of reveal. I was vaguely fuzzy on kind of like the way that this story actually played out, how it ended. I recalled that kind of they don't get away with it. Obviously, you can kind of maybe know that to begin with, knowing how the federal government tends to pursue things like this. Usually, they do not let the bad guy get away. They prefer to kill him than to let him go. Right. So I knew where it was going, but of course, I was left a little bit empty, a little bit head scratching at the end of the film. And as I kind of thought about, like, well, did I really understand this the first time? I think the things that I loved about it the first time and this time are, that feeling of New York. And I know it's maybe a little bit cliche, but not really such or even a particularly New York feeling, but this kind of like populist feeling to it. This feeling of the sensitivity to the presence of the crowd, the presence of the people outside, who aren't necessarily always portrayed heroically. They have kind of a morbid interest in what's going on inside of this bank. But there's a kind of way in which the movie has a lot of like warmth, I think, for a lot of its characters and a lot of the people, and even kind of your average person, to the extent of kind of poking fun at them. But it's a sort of like indulgently kind of warm portrayal of many of the players in this story, and including to some extent the police, though I think the FBI kind of come in as a sort of darkly sinister, cold, kind of soulless force at the end. And certainly the police are kind of portrayed in a way we might see as consistent with this kind of pig narrative that itself is kind of thematized in the movie. This, obviously, and of course the reference to Attica, which I hope we can come back to because it's like a kind of an important moment. But no, there's this kind of warmth of the characters, which this kind of tone of quite naturalistic, but even kind of humorous, writing. These kind of characters are sometimes a little bit dialed up, a little bit eccentric, a little bit odd. But of course, it all comes down to Al Pacino and this portrayal of, I think, a character who, I think we can say that he's sort of framed as an everyman, a kind of character who is subject to these pressures that it seems like almost hard to explain. How did he go kind of quite this crazy to the extent of robbing a bank? But he's not portrayed as an insane person. He's portrayed as quite I think, almost a relatably just stressed out person who's trying to make sense of his life. And he's kind of besieged on all sides, not only by the police, but of course by the people in his life. And I don't think the movie ever really wants us to hate or to castigate the people in his life, but sort of to see somehow on some absurd level that we can kind of relate to this character, even though, as the movie portrays, obviously this is a very rare portrayal of like an LGBTQ relationship at this time. It's obviously it's a very conscious artistic choice. We can talk about that later, though. Let me just say that I really enjoyed the movie. I hope we can connect more of the dots, but let me get Tony get in on this too. Sorry, I'm starting to ramble.
No, thanks, Connor. I mean, so much there. The one thing I did want to reinforce is the notion of like there is no like real cruelty in this film. Like even like I feel like you could show this movie to a 7-year-old and they wouldn't, necessarily be scarred in any real way. Even at the end, the shooting feels, justified, right? Like this is the loner kind of schizoid character who deserves to die, right? He's the dangerous one. Sonny is just kind of the front man who may, have a heart of gold, kind of. But anyways, a lot to go with there, and we can circle back certainly. So, Tony, why don't you? You're bringing up the rear here. Why don't you lay it on us with your thoughts on this viewing, and anything else you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, well, I touched on your point real quick, the about there being warmth or there not being menace. It's interesting because one of the more overtly menacing elements is this prank caller who's sort of saying these like, "Oh, you should kill them all," or "Oh, you're like, are you doing anything to the women in there?" And like when that happens, the movie turns it into a joke. The women are laughing and making fun of this guy, so it completely diffuses this kind of thing that in almost any other context would be menacing and scary. But I just want to touch on that while it was fresh. But yeah, I've seen this movie once before. I watched it when I was in college. I loved it then. I still love it now. I think there's definitely a lot of things to discuss about the movie, but one thing that's great about this movie too is I think it's such an obviously great movie in a way. Like I feel like there's so much of it is just on the surface that's so good. Like I think it's a movie that one of those movies where like every element is just executed to the highest possible level, like the writing, the editing, the performances, the direction. I think it's just all like absolutely fantastic. I think this is an incredibly tight screenplay. While it does slow down a bit in the final stretch, I think it does that in a very kind of deliberate way. I think the way the movie just draws you in immediately with zero setup, zero lag. It just starts with them robbing the bank and you're just in it. And the way that rather than, I think a worse version of this movie would be we start with Al Pacino and we introduce his wife and we introduce his other wife and we introduce his mom and we introduce these pressures and we build it. But no, the movie doles that information out in this deliberate way, paced kind of throughout the movie, where we get little packets of information that kind of colors what we're seeing and affects how we interpret what's going on in the plot. But the actual plot gets going right away. And as you said, Kirk, it starts off kind of as a thriller, and it doesn't really, by the end of the movie, it doesn't feel like really a conventional thriller, but it works on that genre level to bring us into the story. And it's a formula we're kind of familiar with, and we kind of know what to expect, and it gets us engaged and gets us locked in. But this movie does such an efficient job of establishing its little world and its characters. And one thing that I think is really brilliant about it, about from the writing perspective, is the way the world of the story gradually expands. We start off in basically one room with a handful of characters, and then we get the street, we get the cops who have their own little culture, their own little side of things. We have the crowd, which has their side of things. We have the FBI, and then, of course, the other people in Sonny's life who are gradually introduced. So the movie, there's no point where we feel overwhelmed. It does it in a very clean, kind of efficient way, where we're given this nice little bite-sized story, and gradually the scope of that story expands before kind of brutally contracting in its final moments. So with that scene in the car, where you're right back in that really tense final, it's just really elegant. And obviously this is based on a true story. I'm not super familiar with the story. Maybe this is just, beat for beat what happened. I don't know, but it's not. Okay, Kirk is shaking his head. But I think as far as storytelling, as far as writing goes, it's brilliant. And I think the dialogue too has a really nice kind of naturalistic feeling to it. There's a lot of great little lines. But he says, like, I'll do everything I can to stop anything I can. The guy yelling, I'm a fucking star. His body functions might have done it, but he didn't do it. Just things like that, which are just these really great little lines, these really great little moments that feel so just human. And I think, as Connor kind of alluded to, this is a movie that's just overflowing with warmth and just humanity, where every little character, which, like, a lesser movie would not give each of these characters as much love and attention as it does. And it's not even a matter of like giving these little side characters monologues or big scenes where they get to do something. They just get a little nugget of personality, which means in a little scene, exactly who that person is, whether it's the, I don't know, is it Miriam, the woman who's calling her husband, and she says, like, just make whatever's there. And like he's asking her, like, it's a great little window in her relationship. She's in this life-threatening situation. Her husband's like, what am I supposed to eat for dinner? It's just this beautiful little moment that tells us so much about her life. And that's all we get, and that's all we need to get. And then the woman who, I don't remember her name, Maria, I believe, and she's in the bathroom, and her supervisor's like, oh, she's always in there, she always spends 50 minutes. It's just like every character gets like a little nugget of characterization, which so beautifully fleshes out the world and makes it feel like we're watching a real story happening to real human beings. Which I think really just gives the movie such texture and such color. And I think the whole movie has an incredible texture, both just visually, in terms of the costuming, in terms of the set design. And this is something I love about movies from the 70s, especially like, New York 70s movies, is they have this feeling of just delicious texture, which is present from the first frames of the movie, where you're getting the cuts between the kind of the different places in the neighborhood, and just people on the street, the guy with the hose. And it feels real. It feels like someone just propped a camera up and filmed the guy. And like this, we're getting a window into another time and place. The people in this movie look like real people you could see. The clothes look like real clothes they're wearing. The fact that everyone gets sweaty by the end of the movie. This movie is just visually full of texture. In terms of the writing, it's full of texture. And that goes into the direction. I think the direction is incredibly masterful on Lumet's part. Obviously, as you said, he's very established at this point. He did, 12 Angry Men, for God's sake. He'd done Serpico just a few years before, which is another great film. But this is just him just at the absolute top of his game, at the peak of his powers. Scenes are paced perfectly. Just the camera movements in the bank where he pans and you have characters walking, just the the camera movement and the blocking, and you have a bunch of characters and everyone has a little thing they're doing. No one's just there to be there. Everyone has something they're doing. Everyone has an activity. It's just amazing. And the acting just across the board, like the performances are astonishing. And obviously we talked about Pacino, and Al Pacino, I think, is one of the great actors of all time. Obviously, talk about the Godfather movies and so on, but just, man, just what an electric, scintillating performance, where every moment you just can't take your eyes off him. And he's got so much emotion and so much just electricity behind his eyes. And he's just such amazing screen presence. And just what a powerful performance, where he really conveys just the feeling, feeling the desperation, the fear, the anxiety, the impatience, the grabbing on desperately to any kind of glimmer of hope he can get from the cops. Just like he nails it. And John, I've always said Cazale. I Googled it a minute ago. I think it's Cazale is what it said. But John Cazale, who's just like, I mean, this guy is like, man, like what a tragedy. Like, because this guy was like, he played one season and he's in the Hall of Fame. It's just like man, like, it's crazy. Like he just like he knocked it out of the park in like everything he was in. And just like, I love this character he plays. And it's another great example where we don't get a ton of information about this guy, about Sal, I believe is his name. We don't get a ton of information about Sal, but what little we do get is so impactful. It's so powerful, where he just says, he asks, Al Pacino asks him, like, is there anyone you need to call? We're never going to be able to come back. And he just says no. And he doesn't say it like he's super sad about it. He just like, he never even occurred to him, like, who would I even call? The bit where he says, can we go to Wyoming? Because it's probably just the first place he thought of. It's just like, it tells us so much. And like, we don't need a whole backstory. We don't need to know how he and Sonny know each other. I guess they were in prison together. I guess that's either stated or implied, but we really don't need any more information than that. And that in itself tells us a lot. The fact that you would choose to do this with this guy tells you about pretty much how half-baked this scheme is in the first place. But yeah, I could go on, but I think this movie is a masterpiece. I think this is amazing. And I think we could get into obviously some of the thematic elements. And I think one thing I kind of glom onto is the element of there's the act itself, there's the robbery, and then there's the sort of the narrative about the robbery. There's the PR element, there's the crowd and how the crowd reacts. There's the police having to kind of play it a certain way and sort of having to be mindful of the crowd and mindful of the media. There's the presence of the media. Obviously, there's John Cazale's concern about the news implying that he's homosexual, in his words, and it being very important that he kind of set the record straight on that front. And just like, I think that's kind of an interesting angle to take about how this is sort of like, the real story is the story that's being told, and how's the story told. And that's sort of a meta aspect too, where, who are we in this movie? We're the crowd, right? We're the people outside. Who are we rooting for? Why are we rooting for them? And I think we could dig into obviously the kind of populist or anti-establishment aspects of the movie too, which I think the movie is actually pretty cynical about a lot of those things. I think that, Pacino's character is certainly not I wouldn't consider him like a populist hero. He doesn't seem very particularly ideological. He seems pretty confused. He seems like even his own goals, he's not really pursuing in a very effective way. And yeah, so I think it's a pretty cynical movie, but I don't know. So to me, it almost feels like someone who kind of believed in the dream of the 60s, but was kind of like disillusioned by it and maybe doesn't necessarily have a meaningful answer or path forward. They're just kind of in that cynicism. That's kind of where I think the movie lands. I obviously could be wrong about that. But anyway, but just as far as the visceral experience of watching it, this movie is about pretty much as good as it gets. I also think this is a movie you could show to pretty much anybody and that they would like. I think it's an extremely accessible movie because it just nails the fundamentals of filmmaking and storytelling so absolutely brilliantly, on the level of like a Hitchcock or something. So yeah, so I'd say that it's good. I would give it a thumb up. I would give it a thumb up. Yeah.
All right. And it would be very funny if you voted no later. But all that being said, fucking hate Al Pacino. No, I love what the last, obviously I'm picking up on the last thing you said because it's the last thing you said a little bit, but the notion of accessibility, I think there isn't much ambiguity in this movie, really. And, that seems to be kind of a hallmark of a lot of great movies, great pieces of cinema. I mean, you look at like Stanley Kubrick, he's kind of an ambiguity merchant in a way, but aside from him, a lot of the best directors of our time have very much been straightforward. They want to convey something. There's a sense of universality that I think people enjoy because it fosters an understanding of that we're watching the same thing and that we're experiencing similar but perhaps different and exciting differences to be, at that. But I don't know. I think that there is something there. But obviously we have the general sense of the movie down, and there are some technical elements I wanted to mention. Reading a little bit about this movie, there was some improvisation that took place. I think the best scene in the whole movie is when Al Pacino's talking to Chris Sarandon, his wife by, not his legal wife, I shall say. I don't know how else to define that person, but Leon. And that phone call is like devastating. Like, and it's just so, it's very menial, and there's some bickering and but at the same time you just hear it and you're like, for me, I just hear two people that know they're kind of not going to be talking to each other anymore, and they know that they're not going to be in their lives anymore. And it's kind of like in a different, scenario, they might have made it work, but now they have the, Sonny's fucked everything up, and obviously they're in a very, very difficult situation. And, I think it's just a real emotional inflection point for the film, but that was improvised, at least on Leon's part, on Chris Sarandon's part. The Wyoming line was improvised by John Cazale. Some of like the time and space, like right from the beginning, we get a montage of New York City. It's authentically the 70s, right? Like it would be hard to guess a different decade for this movie. If you at least have a modicum of understanding of, dress and kind of mannerisms and attire of that era. And then also we know where it is. It's in New York City. So it's just, I think we're all kind of placed there. We're transported there. We've got Elton John in the background and Marina. And, it almost reminds me of how Die Hard 3 opens. And I know that's like a kind of a woeful comparison, but it's that song, what is it, like Summer in the City? It opens with a montage. It's probably a callback to this movie, honestly. But there's something about New York in the summer, right? It's unforgiving. There's no real respite from the heat unless you kind of step into a park. Everybody's in a state of, oppression from the heat, but also like exuberance and frenzy. And, there's like a splitting between night and day that's not really as distinct as it is in the winter. Or, I mean, it's more distinct than it is in other seasons. So I think that in and of itself, there's a character. And obviously it's, the dog days of summer. That's the inspiration for the name of the film. So there is some importance there. But, there's a lot of different ways we could go. I do want to circle back. Connor, you had mentioned that you were intrigued by the reference to Attica. The infamous prison riots took place in the 70s. I believe 43 people died, 33 prisoners, 10 correctional officers. What was your take on how that fit within the larger thematic landscape of this film, or perhaps the time and place within which the film is set? What do you think, Connor?
Kirk, I don't want to like overstate it. I mean, I remember like when before I knew this movie, like all that I knew about it was there's a part where they chant Attica, Attica, which is not actually what happens in the movie. It's a very brief moment where he says Attica, Attica, Attica. Doesn't really chant it, and it seems that the crowd seems to react. We don't really get a confirmation that the crowd is kind of reacting sort of with him and kind of coming to love Sonny because he's mentioning this. Now, what I forgot was that there's a moment where he actually mentions very briefly when he's talking to the bank manager. He says, "Yeah, well, like in Attica, they killed 42 people. You never know what these cops with these pigs are going to do, or something like that." So he has a vague sort of familiarity with Attica. It would seem. I'm just picturing it's sort of just he read about it, a bit, and like many people, he was, displeased with it, distasteful, like, found it, very horrible what happened. But who knows what his familiarity or his attachment to it is. He sort of employs it a little bit opportunistically, but I think I think you can see that as a very significant moment. Even if our character doesn't necessarily know the significance of Attica, its pertinence to this situation, to the whole society they live in, is very relevant. So basically, just a refresher on Attica. It was a sort of riot that then turned into basically a very organized revolt and standoff, a hostage taking situation, which led to a standoff. I think, I forget how many days it was. It was many, perhaps it was only more than a month, I believe, that basically this group of prisoners, this organized group of prisoners, basically got everyone together in the prison. They sat in the yard and they took correctional officers as hostages. They negotiated essentially for an improvement in their conditions, which were horrible in Attica prison, including like sexual violence, torture, things like that, things of this nature. Eventually getting Nelson Rockefeller, the governor, involved, but it ended essentially with the police choosing to, or with the whoever was, state troopers, whatever it was, who came in and basically killed everyone, including just open fire on the entire, prison population, killing almost all of the hostages, and many, many, many of the inmates. So obviously, it's kind of a parallel situation in that we also have a standoff with hostages. Obviously, it's very different. There's not this kind of like intentionality of, sort of an organized group with a manifesto and things like this. But obviously, there's a parallel situation of being kind of in this pressure of this system, feeling this oppression, which is, I think, obviously, in the case of Attica, it's quite literal, mostly Black and Latino prisoners in a sort of white, staffed prison system. Obviously, we can see exactly kind of, it's a very clear sort of like illustration of the way that the American society worked at the time. It still does, of course. This, of course, Dog Day Afternoon scenario is much more subtle. The pressures that he's subject to are not necessarily, so obvious. And I'm not sure I would necessarily say that he's portrayed as a victim of a kind of systemic, sort of oppression necessarily in the text of the movie. We can talk about that further. But I think it's obviously trying to kind of literalize, trying to maybe connect subtly kind of the struggle of the average person, because I do believe our Sonny character is kind of portrayed as a sort of everyman, despite the specificity and kind of the oddity of his situation. He's portrayed as a character who is kind of subject to some similar pressures as many sort of baby boomer sort of spectators are somehow. His overbearing mother, his wife, his lover, there's something of trying to kind of bridge a gap and trying to connect us to this. So I'm not saying that he necessarily deserves to kind of wear the mantle or cheer or sort of have the slogan of Attica, but obviously there's a connection there. And obviously there's a similarity in ultimately the police planning, or the FBI at least planning to kill John Cazale's character, which is implied to be sort of subtly, tacitly agreed to by Sonny, who kind of sells him out to save his own skin. Obviously, we feel very helpless in this situation, as Sonny does, I think, to an extent. But yeah, I don't know. Does anyone want to jump in on something they want to say? Or Kirk, do you have another question? I had kind of a thing I would pivot to, actually.
Yeah, feel free, Connor. Take us where you'd like.
But for me, like, I was wondering if you guys are thinking of like, one thought I had is like, if this story were portrayed today, I'm thinking of like, I've watched a lot of like true crime Netflix shows and stuff like that. is there another way you could have portrayed this story? Is there another way, or did it have to be portrayed in this exact way? I mean, I'm thinking kind of like what I love about this movie, I think was very intentional. For instance, okay, on Wikipedia, it lists other kind of treatments of this subject. There's a documentary called Dog, the Sex Addict Heist, or something like that, which, portrays kind of the literal facts of this event, of this crime, this attempted bank robbery, but obviously portrays the John Vojtovich, I believe is his name, the sort of Sonny, the basis of Sonny, portrays him as kind of this odd character. And in fact, he did have other odd things about him. It wasn't just this. He was sort of an eccentric character in many ways. But what I do like about this movie is the fact that he's very much portrayed as kind of like very intentionally as sort of this everyman character who is in no way is a freak show, which is sort of what the movie itself thematizes. The idea of the people watching, the TV crews, the reporters reporting on the situation, kind of portray Sonny as sort of a freak, right? And I think it's so amazing that the movie almost predicts and is itself kind of the antidote to later depictions of these same events. It's very interesting. But anyway, I'm curious if you guys, have other thoughts on the subject matter, how it's portrayed.
I think one of the most interesting things, and thanks for kind of bringing this to the forefront, Connor, is, who is Sonny? How does society see Sonny? How do we see Sonny? How does Sonny see himself? And one thing that really sticks out is, to me, that it feels as though he is kind of given some slack, in areas where we might be quicker to judge other people. And I wonder why that is. I wonder if it's Al Pacino. I wonder if it's the fact that, the latent homosexuality, whatever it might be. Like, I think about if he had kind of arranged for a second marriage while still being married with, a woman. I think there's something that is almost essential to this film. And I know I'm kind of treading in dangerous waters here, but I guess I'm just trying to kind of cogitate out loud, pontificate here, and think like, why does that change? Because ultimately it's who he is, and we still know he does horrible things. He drives Leon to attempt to commit suicide. He puts a gun to his wife's head, or does, threatens to kill her because she won't go on a kiddie ride. Like, his kids are, it's mentioned multiple times, his kids are on welfare. His dad, Dominic Chinis from The Sopranos, calls him like, I don't know what he says. He says he's dead to him, but he just kind of generally doesn't like him. But yet, Sonny, I think when people come away from this film, they think he's like a hero of the people, like somebody who's, kind of mixed up in a system. But it's like, there's a lot of agency that he has in creating his situation. It's not like somebody's forcing his hand here. And I wonder if it's, it's tied back to the actual story where John, in court said that he robbed the bank to pay for his partner's sex reassignment surgery, when there are purportedly other motivations that may have been afoot. One even going so far as to say that this was a job orchestrated by the Gambino crime family. So it's like, there's these different versions of Sonny, and there's these variables that we're trying to, like, I'm doing the unnecessary task of trying to control for. And I don't really know if there's any sort of resolution or if it even matters. But I think it's an interesting thought to, like, kind of see why we presuppose that Sonny is one way or another. Like, he's, it's almost like his mannerisms, the way he seems very safe, or what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of not a threat. He's somebody who's kind of fumbles around and seems preoccupied, but ultimately harmless. And he even says, like, I bark, see Sal over here, he bites, kind of inferring that he's not one that's going to shoot innocent people. But I just wonder, like, is that why we kind of align ourselves with Sonny? Is it the fact that at this very difficult time for the gay community, we see that and we kind of ascribe the marginalization that was occurring at the time to his character, even though we don't really know for sure if that's, I mean, like, we don't know how out he is. I mean, it's hard to know, I guess. Not that that really matters. I'm just, I'm kind of spitballing here. But Anthony, why don't you give us some clarity on, some of these topics, whether it's Attica, whether it's, the highlighting, the spotlighting of, an issue of importance for the gay community and the gay community itself in New York City at this time in the 70s, and how perhaps that was sidelined in American cinema at the same time. It's not something that was overly ubiquitous, to say the least. So, Anthony, whatever you'd like to, kind of touch on these readings of the film or of certain elements of it, and then we'll have Tony, kind of jump in as well, or Connor, if you'd like. But Anthony, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on just everything we've been talking about, and I know that's kind of a difficult task.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes back to, I guess, what Connor was saying about thinking about it today and the way it could have been portrayed, or the sort of updating in our own era. I think it's pretty easy, and maybe too easy, to kind of focus on maybe the marginalized aspect here as something driving it, or as something that simply kind of carried it forward. It struck me as you were talking, Kirk, that we don't need to wonder what this movie would look like in a more recent years. We have a version. It's Good Time with Robert Pattinson, which is essentially a kind of updated version of this, in which a character commits a robbery in its own fashion, and kind of through their kind of foolhardiness, but also their foolishness, unleashes kind of wreck after wreck on the people in their immediate surroundings and the people personal and close to them. It also goes back to the question, I guess, the classic Americana of wanting to root for the small petty thief in some ways, especially the small petty thief of a bank. It's something there just 7 years before this movie in Bonnie and Clyde, the romantic nature of it, but in Dog Day Afternoon becomes somewhat despairing. It becomes actually kind of sad. Like, you can't really imagine them succeeding, but what's more sad is realizing that, like, what are they going to get out of this, even if they got it? And so you want to take in the absurdity of it, and you want to take in the extreme other side of it. You want to kind of imagine that they're actually going to get a plane. And the fact that the plane is brought in, even if it's just a charade and just a kind of like a fake out, it's there as a way to almost torment you as an audience who wants them to kind of get away with it. And I was thinking about this even more recently, as other than Good Time, it's like, what other bank robbery movies have we had recently? And how do they kind of reflect their own kind of moments of financial uncertainty or financial, prosperity, I guess, in some circumstances. Certainly, if I was thinking of Inside Man in the mid 2000s, 2005, during the height of an economic boom, the housing boom. I'm sure that movie would look very different 4 years later. But anyway, all this was saying is, I think the setting of the bank robbery is something just like so classic in the American, I guess, kind of narrative, that there really is no other time and place other than, 74, 75, whenever this came out. And there is no other place other than Sonny and Sal as John Cazale. I know we're just using every last name pronunciation as possible, but Sal and Sonny are. Anyway, that's my thought.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, it's kind of, there is no analog, right? And there doesn't have to be. It is authentic. Like, it's so good that it doesn't need that to fit into some sort of spectrum or timeline. Tony, any reactions to what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I for one loved Jim Caviezel's performance in this movie, but I would say the modern equivalent is Den of Thieves, actually. So if you've not seen Den of Thieves, Give it a watch. It's actually pretty good. It's I've heard it described as heat on Monster Energy drink. So that's if that appeals to you at all, give it a shot with Gerard Butler there. I think it's from 2018, but no, it's nothing like this movie. Anyway, I just had to shout out Den of Thieves while I had the chance. No, a lot of interesting points. Yeah, I think Anthony makes a good point about the outlaw, the archetypal character, and I think this is very much like kind of the gritty 70s depiction of the outlaw, or sort of the like the demystified, kind of brought down to earth, kind of version of it. And I think that, Kirk, when you talk about, Sonny being viewed as a heroic way by audience members or whatever, even though he's not particularly heroic in the text of the movie. I don't know. I think that's just kind of inherent to having, the protagonist being the protagonist of the movie, and having them be, very relatable, to bring back some really insufferable discourse from a few years ago about Joker. We had the guy we see every bad thing happen to him, and all. I'm not saying you're doing that, by the way. I'm just remembering this. But it's a character who you see a bunch of bad things happen to them in a way that kind of we can project ourselves onto or relate to. I think Sonny is a very empathetic, very relatable character, because we can relate to feeling overwhelmed, to feeling, stressed out by people in your life, or, making bad decisions. Like, we are going to project ourselves and our own issues onto this character. But I think that when you watch the movie, his kind of moral grayness, his questionable decisions, I think they definitely come through. At least for me when I watch it. I mean, for instance, there's kind of a funny moment that's, it's a short little moment, but I think it registers, where he's talking with the bank manager, and he's kind of getting impatient with him, and he says, "I have to keep them happy. I have to keep you guys happy. I'd like to see you try it." And it's absurd, because it's like, you're robbing a bank. What do you mean? Like, you created the situation. Like, what do you mean? Like, so I think that, like, the movie is aware of kind of the absurdity of the situation, and I don't think it necessarily lets him off the hook. And I think that, his kind of populist cries of Attica, and all this, and him standing up to the quote unquote pigs and everything. I think, to me, there's almost a sadness, or a tragic element to it, because it's this kind of righteous fury that's being completely misdirected, and it's completely impotent. There's no version of this movie that ends with him freeing the prisoners from Rikers Island. There's no version of the movie where he goes off with his wife, and lives on an island somewhere, sipping coconut juice. It's sort of this. And it's not even like the tragic futility of the hero. It's that this person doesn't even know how to be a hero. Maybe he has the right instincts, and he has the right suspicions of systems of power and oppression and all these things. He's clearly a pretty intelligent guy, and clearly knows, like, what's up. But he has no understanding of what to do with that, or how to apply that knowledge in a constructive way, which I think is like a very, when you think about it, a deeply sad kind of takeaway. So I just think he's a human character. Yeah, I don't think he's a hero. I don't think he's a villain. I think he's a very relatable human being, who is ultimately tragic. So
Well said, Tony, definitely. And Anthony, I did, I like your comparison to Good Time. And the one distinction I will make between that character and this one is that I felt as though Robert Pattinson's character was pathetic, and I didn't really get the sense that Sonny's necessarily was pathetic.
I think Pattinson is also a lot like skeezier and more like malevolent as well.
I mean, threatening to kill your wife, like,
Well, he takes advantage of people constantly in a way that we don't see. We see that, like, Pacino at least has kind of good instincts. He wants to let them go to I don't know. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, we come to question his character, Pattinson's, as the movie goes on more and more too.
Well said. That's true. We do. And it's kind of more in your face, definitely. But regardless, I feel as though we should perhaps segue to the voting portion of this episode. We all have to get up quite soon to begin watching day 3 of the Olympics in Paris. It's very exciting times for all of us. So let's see. Why don't we start with you, Anthony? We'll just go in order. Anthony, any final thoughts and your vote?
It's an automatic yes for me, Kirk. I think so many of the fellow co-hosts have done such a great job of summarizing things that I was still struggling to put into words, having just seen it for the first time. I think it's going to be worth a rewatch and a rewatch very soon. But yes, it belongs in the 706.
Thanks, Anthony. And we have your cat Orpheus, correct?
Yes,
Behind
he's been
you.
feeding me my lines this whole time.
I see. And that's one yes. Connor, go ahead.
To make it short, it's a yes. I will say, just to address the idea of the heroism of Sonny. No, not a hero, a kind of a protagonist character that we relate to. He's alternately heroized and hated by the crowd. I think that's something we can that's sort of a subject position kind of quality to him. And there's kind of the off-screen heinousness of his attitude towards. There's only one moment where he completely loses his temper. When he's actually doing the robbery, he's kind of weirdly disengaged, kind of weirdly distracted, and kind of like not fully there. He's kind of amateurish, right? So that I think kind of humanizes him in a way, makes him less of a threat. But of course, like we learn more about his situation. He has more culpability in his relationships than we previously realized. I think there's something still kind of that makes him sort of an everyman in a certain sense, but I have to think about it more. But yeah, it's a yes.
I just want to, before we go to Tony, I forgot to shout out Charles Durning, I believe is his name, the Moretti, the police officer, lieutenant, whoever it might be. He was fucking phenomenal in this film. Sergeant Eugene Moretti. Oh my goodness. And it's, it extends to other people. Penelope Allen was the kind of the lead teller. Sully Boyer was the bank manager. Really great stuff. I mean, just all around. The FBI guy, who I think was it James Broderick? Yeah. Just like the most FBI looking motherfucker you'll ever see in your life, right? Like, it's just straight out of, this dude was born in the J. Edgar Hoover building in downtown DC. But okay, 2-0. Tony, what's your vote? Any final thoughts as well?
For the record, there's a lot of things I like about this movie. I think it's a good movie. I think if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. But I just don't like. This is a pretty easy yes. I'm going to say yes. As much as I'd like to blow your minds there, but no.
All right, that's a clean sweep. It seems like there's nobody forgot to take their meds this morning. It seems like we're all on the same page here in the greatness that is Dog Day Afternoon. So that's great to see. A victory for cinephiles out there. Cinephiles. Let's shorten it to cinephiles out there everywhere. So now we're gonna, go through the nomination process and see which episode will be our next. So I forget who went recently. I always remember, obviously, who picked this film, which was Anthony, but I can't remember between Tony and Connor who was the least recent. Can one of you, fill me in?
I did Bull Durham. I think Tony picked that one.
No, Place Beyond the Pines was before that.
Oh.
It was Kirk again. And then before that was Dogtooth. So I think I was least recent. I'll tempt fate. I'll tempt fate and go second. Let's have Connor go first.
Okay, Connor, Tony, then Anthony. Go ahead, Connor.
Okay, Kirk, hear me out here. Imagine a sort of figure who becomes a kind of media personality. His brand is hillbilly. Okay, he comes from kind of a media background. He rises to the very heights of power. Okay, this my friend, is 1957's Face in the Crowd, starring Andy Griffith, a story of a sort of music, kind of country music figure who eventually becomes this kind of politicized, ultimately becomes like a very big player in politics. Of course, perhaps he's being used by sinister forces in his society, but this is a movie that tells an amazing story of kind of the of this significant shift, of really the shift in the party system that we still have today, right? Of kind of Republicans, Democrats, how they moved around. We're kind of still talking the kind of right wing is kind of the Democrats, actually, at this point, still. Sorry, not to get too much into the weeds here, but basically, this is a sort of study of kind of media and politics, how it emerges and kind of in its modern form. It's an amazing kind of document. Great movie as well on a cinematic level, but this movie is just unbelievable as a kind of window into the development of politics. It has quite a distinct kind of narrative and sort of story to tell. And what am I saying? What am I saying here? It's kind of angle on a take on what was happening at this time. It's really worth a watch, Kirk. And if we watch it, we will avert the rise of Trump again.
You know, I was getting really like Hillbilly Elegy. I that would have been an amazing nomination. I mean, it would have been just incredible. And I thought that's what you were going for, and you were very clever with that. But okay, what year was it? 56?
57.
57. So we're Eisenhower, right? 57.
Believe so.
Ike. You like Ike? Okay. Interesting. Face in the Crowd. Had you nominated this one before? I feel like I've heard of it.
Yes, I believe twice before.
It's another Mishima syndrome. Okay.
I have a couple of Mishimas going, I have to say.
You have a lot.
Kiss me deadly.
Out of context, that's a great sentence. I've got so many Mishimas going
Yeah,
right now. You have multiple coups being planned.
No coups, okay.
All right, Tony, go ahead.
Should I pitch Hillbilly Elegy? No, I
Do
haven't
it.
seen it.
Fucking
I haven't seen it. I'm not going to pitch it. I would love if I had a take on that one, but I should see it now. I should go back and watch it. No, so my pick is from the 1990s. It is a French film. This is Delicatessen, directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet and another gentleman. Mark, I had to look this up. Mark Caro, but Jean-Pierre Jeunet may sound familiar because that is Amelie, one of our very first episodes. This is a film that is similar to Amelie in certain ways in terms of its visual brilliance and exuberance. But this is a kind of a black comedy, and it's a post-apocalyptic film set in one apartment building in a food scarce society where some pretty nasty things go down. And it's as I said, it's a dark comedy. It's surreal. It's over the top. As I said, visually extravagant. It's just a movie that, like, if you love just exuberant cinema that really just likes to flex its muscles and just show what it can do and just have fun. In the same way that Amelie sort of did, but also you might see in something like Evil Dead 2 or, I don't know. That's a good point of comparison, I guess. That is a movie you should pick. I think it's a movie that is very castable and would be a lot of fun to do. It's been in the back of my mind for a long time now. I've wanted to pitch it for a while, and I decided, why not? So.
Wait, you said a movie that's very castable?
Podcastable. I've said castable before.
Okay.
Come on.
When you said that, I was thinking like as in they could recast it. But
we could cast Marissa Tomei, but we won't do that because of Kirk's.
No, we won't do that, Tony.
Strange opinions.
No, we won't do any of that.
Right.
Anyways, yeah, Tony, and I do appreciate you waiting to pitch JD Vance's Hillbilly Elegy until after you see it. Okay, Anthony, you've got some real contenders here. You got Delicatessen, you got Face in the Crowd. Gosh, I feel like you're going to throw us a curveball. Let's hear it.
Yeah, no, this is tough. I like that Tony threw us back with the Amelie director pick. It actually reminds me, there's one point about Dog Day Afternoon, I forgot to bring it up. Chris Sarandon is also the vampire in Fright Night from another episode that we've done. So just want to throw that out. But Okay, this was tough. And hearing what everybody has to say, Kirk, because I have to say is there are good Terminators, and there are bad Terminators. And I want to watch a good Terminator. Terminator 1, 1984. I've been in the mood for revisiting LA across the decades, revisiting LA across the decades of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s in particular. And the 80s LA are especially fascinating for being one of the grungiest, most dangerous cities in the US. And in its own perverse way, I think the original Terminator captures that element in a way that I know I haven't obviously have not lived through, but what I could imagine the fearfulness, the scariness, in the same way, Dog Day Afternoon and maybe Taxi Driver capture 70s New York. The Terminator, of course, which I feel like you don't need to recap, stars Arnold Schwarzenegger as someone sent back to kill the future leader of the resistance, Kyle Connor. And there's just something there. It's early James Cameron. It's just bold sci-fi action in a way that we haven't done a bit. So it's a bit different than I think the French pick of Tony's and the political thriller of Connor's, but more on that in a second.
All right. Don't tell me when you said what you just said about good and bad Terminators that you don't like Terminator 2. Is that a take you have?
No, that's actually the other one I like. I guess my hot take would be Terminator: The Sarah Chronicles is pretty good.
What year was that, roughly?
It's the TV show on like Fox TV with Summer
Okay.
Glau. Yeah.
I thought this was like one of the Christian Bale one, where he had to freak out.
Terminator Salvation. The freak out's the only thing anyone remembers about it.
Yeah.
The true hot take would be if the Emilia Clarke one was the best. Okay, I just had to say that.
Oh wow. Oh my God. Okay. So this is as always, an assortment to marvel at. So let's go for rebuttals. Oh yeah, Connor. What jumps out about your film, or maybe denigrate the others? Your choice.
They're interesting, these other films. I don't know. Obviously, Amelie guy. We should give him another chance. Terminator. It's been literally ages. It's been. I probably saw it as but a tot. I would say I might even been only slightly more than a tot at the time that I watched it. I think it's probably a rather violent movie. I probably shouldn't have watched it, but so that is to say that almost it's as if almost I haven't seen it. So I'm almost going in both of these having not seen them practically. But my movie, Kirk, I think you're gonna really dig it. I think it's black and white, but it's a very funny. It's a comical movie. It has many interesting moments, kind of commenting on the media life of the time. It's not just like I think Anthony almost called it like a political thriller. It's not a thriller so much. It has very dramatic moments, but it's definitely sort of in the vein of like satire. And I think you will find it very like fascinating from like a cultural historical perspective. There's some things that may be a little hokey, but I think you'll have something to really fasten your teeth into. And I think the parallels to today, I know, and this was a movie that sort of, there was a couple think pieces that came around in 2016, like this movie explains Trump. And I think that's a way too big a claim for the movie. But I think it has there's elements to it that I think will feel very illuminating for our present moment if we watch it.
That's, I mean, certainly topical. And I am an Andy Griffith fan. So, is Ron Howard in it? No. He's like probably what?
Would have been like an
10
embryo.
years old, maybe.
10 years, I guess he would have been probably. He's probably 1940 something birth, right? So yeah, probably would have been.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. So we got Facing the Crowd. Tony, go ahead.
Ron Howard was apparently born in 1954. Just so you know.
Ooh, okay.
No shit.
So he's 70 years old. All right.
Wow.
So these are really good picks. I've seen both of these. They're both amazing movies. I would love to do. I think Face the Crowd's a great pick. Certainly in an election year, if I get it up by then, it might be uploaded in 2028 or something. But no, it's
It's a
definitely
battleship kind of
it's a
situation.
battleship situation for sure. But I think it'd be good. Although we might be tempting fate if we do it. And then Terminator 1, I think that I do prefer Terminator 2, but I do think sometimes Terminator 1 gets short shrift a little bit. I feel like there's sort of a conventional wisdom that 2 is one of the sequels that's better than the original. They're very different movies, I feel like, in terms of their feel and their vibe, but Terminator 1, I think, is a true classic in its own right. I would love to do either of those. I just remind, I guess, is I don't know, it's French. We haven't done it in a while. It's a vibe we haven't done really in a while. And it's I compare it to Amelie, and I for good reason. It's definitely it will remind you of Amelie in certain respects, but very different from Amelie too. But I think it's bright, it's colorful, it's weird, it's got amazing visuals. It's just the sort of thing that when we talk about film as an art form, what does film do that other media cannot do? And I think that I gravitate to movies that really embrace the cinematic parts of cinema. And this movie absolutely does. It's a movie that reminds me why I like watching movies. And I think that it's a movie that's very fun to watch. And I think that seem to remember you liking Amelie. I think you will definitely like it. You will definitely respond to it. It's a movie that will make you have a reaction, I think. I think the time is ripe to do something like this.
And we have the Olympics, right? No time like the present. So maybe that means, Anthony, you need to save your film for 2028 so we can watch it to coincide with LA. But all right, Anthony, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think Tony's pick as a pitch or not a pitch for it is like Amelie was my choice, I think, back then. Amelie represents my personality in 2015. Delicatessen is definitely a Tony personality version of that film. But I enjoy it. I think that is a cool kind of choice, and it could be fun to talk about. Connor's film is intriguing to me because I only know of Andy Griffith from the Andy Griffith Show, and I put it on a list to watch this movie after Connor nominated it twice. So I feel like I will get to it whether we discuss it or not. It's been down. All I know about this film, other than what he said, is that yes, I've seen those headlines that this film, explains XYZ current situation for the last couple of years. So there's that. And then when it comes to Terminator, first I messed up in the Terminator 1. He's going back to kill Sarah Connor. I mixed up the name. Sorry. But, I don't think there's necessarily a better film in Terminator 1 or 2. But my choice for choosing the first Terminator is that it leans into the kind of the pulp horror narrative of the kind of sci-fi genre that I find really fascinating, while at the same time maintaining the kind of propulsion of the action that becomes kind of picked up in the second film. It's something that we haven't done in a while. I suppose we haven't really done a straightforward kind of genre piece. So it could be kind of fun to go back to. It is also, I think, just fascinating if we're thinking about it sociologically, 1984, what's going on in the US to envision such a dark, gloomy LA? Why does this vision of LA stick with us? And why are we still kind of, thinking about these kind of images of the Terminator film that have kind of lived on? To become almost parodies in a way. What can we do to kind of reclaim them? What can we talk about? I don't know. There's just so much I think there that's rich for discussion. So Terminator 1 is my pick.
All right. This is hard. It's like I have competing motivations. I have strong reasons for picking two of these films, and I'm going to pick neither and pick the third. So that is Face in the Crowd. I'm going to pick Connor's movie. I'm picking it. Obviously, the political relevance, it's on all of our minds right now. We haven't gone back to the 50s in, I don't know, feels like a year at least. Maybe not that long. But I am curious. The fact that you've nominated it multiple times tells me something. Portends good things, I would say. But I do want to see the other, two. I've only actually seen Terminator 2, to be honest. But Terminator 1 is on my list. And then Delicatessen, I may be incentivized to be watching French films in the coming future. So let's go with Connor. Congrats, Connor. What do you have to say? You got over the hill. One of your Mishimas is gone.
I will. This is one of my Mishimas off the list, which I'm very grateful for. Very, very grateful for. And I will reward you with my Walter Matthau impersonation. Next episode.
Well, there's the cliffhanger. I thought we were going to get it now, but in typical Netflix style, it's the next episode. But all right,
Connor. Before we go, Connor, you have to post Mishima accomplished with no context on social media.
Just see what happens.
Immediately arrested. Yeah.
Tag some relevant accounts. Anyways, Anthony, take us away.
I'll have what she's having.